Your dreams are bigger, bolder, and more badass than the life you're living now, but something just keeps getting in the way. Join certified coach and former therapist Diane Wingert for the Driven Woman podcast. She'll show you how to get rid of whatever is holding you back so you can stop spinning your wheels and up-level your life. Get ready to hop in and buckle up. This is the Driven Woman podcast, and we're heading for the fast lane.
Well, hey there, Driven Woman, and welcome back to the podcast. If you've ever worked for a company and described your job as soul-sucking, this episode is for you. If you've ever felt compelled to leave a job or even an industry because it just felt gross and you just didn't feel in good conscience that you could continue to work in that company or industry, this episode is for you. What is the topic? Values. I recently connected with today's guest, Laura Eigel, because we both share the belief that high-achieving women are really only fulfilled when they work in alignment with their core values, have the opportunity to set boundaries to honor those values, and are able to mentor other women to do the same. Laura has a Ph.D. in organizational psychology. She's a college professor, a published author, a podcaster, advocate, and coach. She is also a wife and mom to 2 young sons. Her company, The Catch Group, was founded on the principle of living a life guided by your values, and she's here with me today to talk about her recently published best-selling book, Values First. The bottom line is, if you are a leader, people are watching, and we have come to a point in our culture where consumers are no longer willing to support individuals, companies, or causes that are not in alignment with their values. So it's really important that we know ours. Are you ready? Let's do it. So Laura, thank you so much for joining me today for one of my very favorite topics, and I know yours, which is women, leadership, and authenticity. We are going to talk about all the things that we love to talk about: boundaries, conflict, why it's so important that we show up with our values, and so much more. So let's get right to it. What are your values?
Thank you for the question. And then just thank you for having me. I have been really excited to have this conversation with you. We have talked in the past. We had the privilege of having you as a guest on my podcast. I'm so excited to be here with your audience. And my values, I love this as the starting place of our conversation today. So my values are family, growth, development, advocacy, achievement, and balance. Those are mine. There's 6. Yeah.
This is why we like each other. And the values for your business, the Catch Group.
Yeah, the values for my business are similar. And it's interesting because they're similar, but they're overlapping too. So I have also values of growth. I have a value of feedback. I have a value at the Catch Group of diversity, because I think really understanding everybody's experiences is going to make your own experience better. And then another one of my favorite values of the Catch Group is also celebration. Yeah. And then my really, really big favorite is rest, because rest is just so integral to all of it. So those are, some of them are overlapping and some of them are different on purpose.
Yes, I love it so much. And I think we cannot talk about boundaries. We cannot talk about experiencing conflict in the workplace. We cannot talk about leading with your values first, the name of your book, if we don't talk about rest, because then we're going to be having a conversation about burnout, which is what we're hoping to avoid.
Yeah, we're trying to avoid that at all costs. And so, I think rest to me within the business is all about how I program my time personally, spend my time as a CEO versus in and on the business, taking time to rest, but then also how do I build that into all of the programs too? So it's very important and kind of fundamental that way. And then that overlaps into mine and in terms of balance. So when I talk about balance, it's not work-life balance. It's really this idea of feeling balance, being centered, and rest is a really big part of that for me specifically.
You just published your first book, and I'm going to say your first book because I have a sneaking suspicion it won't be the last. And that was around the time that we connected first. And what really impressed me so much about the book is not only all of your concepts, which we will get into, but how timely it is. Because we are in a place right now where we are 2.5 years into a global pandemic that has utterly transformed the workplace, I think, permanently. We're no longer talking about the new normal. We're no longer talking about getting back to the way things were. Things have been so completely disrupted, lifestyles, options, everything about the way we work, what work looks like. And we also have the Great Resignation. We have shortages, jobs that cannot be filled in literally every sector. And I was literally just watching a news program on this last night that it's not that there aren't qualified people to fill these jobs. It's that the jobs that are available are not in alignment with the personal values of the individuals who are qualified to fill them. And a lot of those people really did not have such a profound awareness of their values until they were sent home for a couple of years. So would you mind talking about that for just a moment?
Oh, it's such an important time. You are so right. You know, the pandemic, I think, was a time that so many of us got to collectively decide what really mattered most to us, right? We were kind of forced to do it. And what that in turn has done, you've just described it, it's kind of reset our expectations. I really think about the idea of a social contract that we have as an employer and an employee, and kind of pre-pandemic, you know, the employer had, or a corporation generally has, more of that power. You know, they're setting salary and benefits, and they're saying, hey, we'll give you all of this great total compensation package, but in return, you might have a commute and you need to be in person and you're going to travel or whatever it might be. And we were okay with that generally, right? And then the pandemic happened and we were all kind of collectively going through all of this together, and we saw what we could have now. And you mentioned that, yeah, we're not in the new normal anymore. It's just we are where we are. But now what we've brought with us and what we are not letting go of, which is one of the benefits of the pandemic, not a lot, but it did accelerate remote work, hybrid work, but it also put it into perspective and it shifted that social contract. So to your point, this idea of I now know what I want, and that's a non-negotiable. I'm not going to have that long commute anymore. That's great that you have that job opportunity, but that is not what I'm looking for. And that does not align with my values or what I want for my family, and very specifically how I spend my time. Right. And so I think people have a new list of what they will and will not do, which is really great. I will say, though, in some of the work that I do with companies, unfortunately, there still are some, and you mentioned this idea of they can't fill jobs, right? That's an indicator that they have not come all the way, right?
Yes.
There are still companies that are saying, oh, you know, we do want you in the office, or maybe it's let's be here 3 times a week. Or, you know, they're still struggling. There's still some tensions. So while many employers have gone fully remote, like, you know, Spotify and lots of other ones that you've seen on LinkedIn here recently, they're showing all of the really great benefits, right? They're saving on overhead. They have more employee engagement, higher discretionary effort, lots of very tangible benefits for employers and employees. There's still some corporations that are still a bit stuck. And to your point, you've seen that in some of these people that they can't fill jobs or they can't fill them fast enough. And so the social contract is still playing out. And I love the fact that people are putting a line in the sand. And it's a thicker line of this is what I want. And I think values, is a way for us to talk about it, to give not just understanding what your non-negotiables are, but also rooting it into something that really matters to you, and that you can have a language around it, that you can say, you can name it, right? So it's not just that I don't want to commute. It's I want the quality time with my family, and that's what's important, right? It's not that I don't get a lot of training opportunities here. It's the idea that growth is important to me, and I need an employer to sponsor me in programs. And that's going to be part of what I look for in a company. And so I think it's giving us this language to then look and do a check on, are these the values of the employer, right? What does it really like to work there? And they're asking these tough questions, and I think it's only going to be better for employees moving forward if they are able to kind of put a language and really understand what is important to them, and then hold organizations accountable to that.
I couldn't agree more with everything you said. And I recently finished reading The Confidence Code. I cannot stop talking about it, because what was both fascinating and horrifying to me, chapter after chapter after chapter of this book, was across all industries, politics, government, corporate life, academia, professional sports, the military, top women in every field having difficulty feeling confident, knowing what they want, asking for what they want, setting boundaries, defending those boundaries, negotiating them when necessary, and all of the things that you and I coach women on all the time. So I don't think there could be a more important time than this, specifically with respect to boundaries. There's a lot of talk about boundaries right now, and a lot of people think boundaries are just like putting a lock on your door when you work from home so your partner or your kids, or even sometimes dogs, learn how to push open a door. It's like, I'm working, like I may be home, but I'm not home. I'm like working from home. So please don't interrupt me while I'm working. That's a physical boundary, obviously. But in your book, Values First, you talk about a lot more types of boundaries. And something I found particularly interesting is that you talk about boundary setting and jet setting.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I would love it if you would share the distinction between those two.
Yeah. And I love this because I think everybody's kind of getting back out in the world. We're traveling more. We're connecting with people more. We're starting to go to conferences again. And this idea of boundaries, I don't know about you, but when I used to be in corporate, I used to have to travel, and I would go on these trips. And you know this about me, but I'll tell your listeners, I am an introvert. And so just planning for these trips, it would be exhausting just thinking about it, to be honest. So if I was traveling, I had to be in a meeting for a reason. Obviously, I was a leader in an organization. So sometimes I was facilitating, leading meetings, having important meetings, being in front of stakeholders, sometimes being the spokesperson in the room. So you're always on, right? You're on in all those kinds of things. And it takes a ton of your day out, right? As you're leaving. So not only are you in an important meeting, but there's all this other stuff that's happening, right? Because our jobs do not stop when we are traveling. Of course not. Yes. And so this idea of boundaries, I think, is even more important as you're traveling or when you're out of your normal element. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm home, I can control things. I control the pace of my day a little bit more. I have my creature comforts. It's easier to keep my boundaries intact. So when I thought about this idea of jet setting and boundary setting, it's all about how do I bring my boundaries with me, right? And how can I manage my energy, specifically as an introvert? And it's really about setting boundaries for yourself. Like I asked myself the question, how am I going to be most successful in this place? And sometimes it has to do with how I feel myself. It's how much alone time I need, which events I go to, which events I decline, and giving myself permission, this idea that you mentioned before, having the confidence of saying, no, I am not attending this. I am going back to my hotel room because I will not be at my best tomorrow if I stay out. Or even if I come back to my hotel room and I work 4 more hours. I think you have to be even more ruthless with boundaries as you are out of your regular element. So within the book, I talk about different tactics that I've employed, specifically using my experience as an introvert, how to maintain my energy, making sure I get alone time, exercise time, and how do you really put those boundaries in place when you're not at home?
That's so good. And I'm really glad that we're talking about this specifically because I'm going to be going to a conference in October. I'm really excited about it. I haven't been going to many conferences like everyone for the last couple of years, but I choose to share a room at the conference with someone who's an introvert. And I adore this person. I only get to see her once a year, but also I'm an extrovert. So my default is yes. If there's something to go to, if there's an after party, if people are spontaneously saying, hey, do you want to go do, I always say yes. And I regret it. Not because it isn't fun, not because I don't get some benefits from it, but because my default is yes, while your default is probably no, or let me think about it, right? I end up overdoing, I end up overcommitting. And then I come back kind of exhausted, and I really don't have a way to think about implementing and actually leveraging all the new connections, the new information, the new resources. So I choose to share my hotel room with an introvert because I know that she's going to lead the way in pacing. And I'm going to follow her lead. You know, I can't be like running around like a crazy person if she needs to go to bed early or take a nap or, you know, whatever, do fewer things. So I'm like, I know I can't trust myself to deal with the FOMO of missing out on things. So I'm just going to pace myself to her. But man, we're talking about boundaries, but we're also talking about capacity and your value of rest, because even a big old extrovert like me needs and benefits from rest, even if I don't want it. I'm like the kid that doesn't want to take a nap and is screaming, I'm not tired. No, oh yeah, you are. You just don't want to be. When we're talking about boundaries, there's no way to get around the fact that one of the main reasons why human beings, and I think women in particular, are resistant or reluctant to set boundaries is because we think there's going to be pushback. We think that they'll be ignored, they'll be breached. And I know that most of us are conflict avoiders. Let's be honest, most human beings are conflict avoiders. And even if we have to have conflict, we get emotionally sort of charged up around it. So we are not as effective as we could be in times of conflict. One of the things that you talked about in the book that I really appreciated was kind of knowing what the red flags and the traps are before you get yourself into a potential conflict experience, so you can at least do what I call girding your loins. Like you're not going in like a sheep in the wolf's den. You actually have some grounding with you. Can we chat about that for a moment?
Yeah, I love this question. And your point about, we're so worried about all of the things that could happen. And it's really about giving yourself permission and having the confidence to do it. And so as I think about before I even build the boundary, part of the process is, okay, what are the things that I'm worried about? What is going to happen that I won't be able to have this boundary? I'm worried about somebody telling me that I'm not committed, right? Because I might be telling somebody no if I'm shifting my time or whatever.
Yes.
I'm worried about being perceived in a certain way or not available, right? And so as we think about this, before you even have the boundary, I want you to think about all of these things. I want you to write down all of the internal things that you're thinking, and then also the things that other people might tell you. And after we do a review of these, right, what we find is that most of them are internal and nobody's ever told you the things that you're worried about. Nobody actually thinks that. Nobody has actually given you verbal feedback or even insinuated, right, that these are the things. And so I think it's a really important It's an important thing to be aware of, even going into, but feeling that you can plan for it and be prepared for it. But really, a lot of the things that we think will happen are self-imposed. So giving ourselves permission to acknowledge that we've had that thought, but that also nobody's ever actually told me that is a big realization. And I think that's one of the traps and red flags, is like just assuming all of these things, but it really doesn't happen. Another trap or red flag is even just not following things or doing things that you know have worked in the past. I know that you work with a lot of high achieving leaders too. And and the people that I coach, they used to have like really great exercise schedules, or they used to do this, or they used to do that, or they used to have that consistency, but for whatever reason, it's fallen off. But I also like to anchor back into that, because at some point they made that a priority and it was part of their habit. So what part of that has worked for you in the past, and how can you anchor that to this new habit that you're building? I think that's another trap and red flag that we need to spend some time thinking about, to see how we can utilize what's worked for the past to make our future selves more successful too. But yeah, I think a lot of this is just trepidation of really putting yourself first. We've all been conditioned to do so many things for other people that sometimes it's really out of our comfort zone to think about it in this different way. So that's why I have a 3-step method to building a boundary, and I'd love to share that with you if that's okay.
Hey there, it's Diane with a quick announcement. If you've ever heard the expression, what got you here won't get you there, I think this fits perfectly with the challenges that most female solopreneurs face after they've been in business the first 2 to 3 years. You see, the mindset and strategy that got you out of the starting blocks and into the game are not going to help you get to the next level. For that, you need a boss up breakthrough. And in my opinion, that is best delivered in the company of other badass female solopreneurs and facilitated by an expert business strategist, mindset mentor, and coach. Yours truly. I've named my brand new small group coaching program the Boss Up Breakthrough for that very reason, and we're getting the party started this fall. I would love for you to join us if this feels like the next right step to step up your game and to boss up in your business. Make sure you get on the waiting list. There is a link in the show notes. Please add yourself to it, even if you think you may already be on my waiting list. I'll make sure you don't get duplicate emails. I cannot wait to get this party started. I hope you are planning to be there. And honestly, I feel like I should have Lizzo's About Damn Time playing in the background, because some of you have been waiting for this for quite a while. So you'll get all the details really soon. Can't wait to get started. Add your name to the list. And if you want to know what it actually feels like to coach with me, have a listen to this.
A very pivotal moment in our work together, because I feel like I've always heard you teach people how to treat you, but I never really got it. I feel like that is boundaries 101. If you don't set your boundaries, then people don't know where they are. So then when they step over those and you don't do anything, they keep moving. Then they become nothing. And I think that's the problem I had specifically.
Absolutely. You anticipated my next question extremely well.
So for me and the women that I work with, it's this idea of you're kind of going against the grain. You have been doing something for so many years. You're not just trying to build a new behavior, you're unlearning too.
Yes.
Right? Learning.
Yes.
So I like to bring some psychology principles in as I talk about this. So there's a 3-step method to build a boundary. The first is to tie it to something that's important. And for me, that's your value. So this comes back to intrinsic motivation, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So if it's important to us, we're more willing to dive into it, to hold ourselves accountable to it. It provides some of that motivation. And for me, it goes back to that framework, right? It goes, all of my boundaries are tied to one of my values. right? So
Yeah.
it's planting back into that foundation. Okay. So that's the first step, is to tie it to a value. The second is to set up that system. So what is the system? So for me, I'll give an example. One of my values is growth. So that's my own growth and development. I know that I work best with accountability. So for me, it's all about either having a one-on-one coach, having a group cohort that I join, like a mastermind or something, because I'm going to show up for those people. I'm going to show up for myself, and I need a person. And so I know that about me. And so that's part of my process for all of my boundaries for growth and development. And that's part of my system. I also know that if I invest in something, I'm more likely to do it. That's also a system: investing time, investing money, investing relationship, investing, those kinds of things. I'm more willing to keep that boundary. I'm more willing to protect that time. So that's an example of setting up a system. What system works for you? Sometimes technology is helpful, reminders, time blocking, those kinds of things. And sometimes it's just having an accountability partner. And then the third thing, which people that I work with, especially women, this is the hardest part. The third step is to celebrate consistency. And the hardest part here is the celebrate part.
Yes.
And so let's peel the onion back on that. I had a reader reach out to me and say, this piece within the book was the most eye-opening for her. I think she used the word mind-blowing, because she thought about it. In her mind, a boundary was kind of disappointing somebody, because I'm not going to be doing something for them. So this idea of celebrating disappointing somebody was really eye-opening. So, and I thought about that. I was like, yeah, it is celebrating disappointing somebody, but really it's celebrating prioritizing yourself, right? You might be disappointing somebody. That's not for you to own. I want you to celebrate prioritizing you, prioritizing your values, what's most important to you. The other thing is, I just don't think we celebrate enough. And even if it's just something small, I have on my desk and a little, I'm looking over to the side because it's over here on my monitor, like, what are little ways to celebrate? And it might be, for me, it's not shocking, it's alone time, right? It's like read a fiction book, take a hot bath, read this, do that, listen to a podcast,
listen to a true crime podcast, because you're kind of a junkie, right?
Yes, listen to a true crime podcast on a walk. Grab my favorite latte. And it doesn't have to be, huge things, but this idea of celebrating goes back to positive reinforcement, right? And so I just don't think we celebrate ourselves enough. And sometimes doing the actual boundary is in and of itself motivating, but I want you to double down on that. And so I want you to celebrate that success. Celebrate disappointing somebody, because to me, that's a sign that you are prioritizing you.
Oh my goodness. This was like such a great download, because all of that is absolutely true. And I literally have not ever met, I don't think ever, a high achieving woman who doesn't need that message, because it's really interesting. But those of us who are the most highly educated, the most ambitious, the most driven to accomplish and achieve are typically the worst about celebrating our achievements. It's like, check, 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 check. Like everything you do is you just expect it of yourself. And if you expect it of yourself and you do it, it's no big deal. You're just fulfilling an expectation. I'm like, well, hold on a second.
Yeah, you're just meeting your high standards.
Well, when you have it's beautiful to have high standards. But if you do not set boundaries, people will take advantage of the fact that you have high standards, because they know you can be counted on to not just call it in, but to go above and beyond. And that absolutely leads to not only burnout, but resentment. And most of the women that I know will end up blaming themselves for being taken advantage of in the workplace. So it's like, holy smokes, we are achievers, we are motivated, we, are highly focused on growth and doing our very best and delivering excellence. And when we don't know how to comfortably, confidently, and in a guilt-free, unapologetic way say, I can't do that, or I can do this part of it, but not that part of it, and be prepared to put ourselves first, I don't know how anybody can really last in corporate or academia or even in the nonprofit world. I see so many businesses, and I hear about this from so many women that I work with, that the values that their company espouses not only are not in alignment with their own values, they are not practiced in the company culture. And this is
Yeah.
especially true for people of color and anyone that doesn't fit neatly into the corporate norms. I think they have the hardest time. Do you think there are ever situations where it's really, you can empower someone to know what matters most and to put themselves first and to get more comfortable knowing that putting themselves first may be a loss of power, a loss of control, a disappointment of some sort to someone else? How do we speak to the safety aspect? Because that has to be part of the equation.
Yeah, I think it's a prerequisite. It's table stakes. And it's unfortunately not the case in many organizations, to your point. Those values that they say they have, it's literally just words on a wall,
Yep.
and they don't see the behavior translate. So I think there's a couple of levels here. There might be holistically at an organization, there might not be psychological safety, but there may be spaces of it. And there might be spaces of psychological safety within relationship, right?
Yes.
Within manager relationship or coworker relationship. And I think that's where I'd love for people to try. And this is where I talk about, hey, I'm my authentic self when I'm living my values. But I will also say I'm not always 100% in every situation, right? And I can say that in many different places. Maybe when I was in the C-suite, I was doing that 100% when I was leading my team. But then when I was in other relationships, potentially with stakeholders or with other senior leaders, I didn't feel all 100% psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
So guess what? You didn't get 100% of me. And I think that's okay. I think we have to be all right with that. But in those situations, I was protecting myself. I still was using boundaries. And
Yes.
I had to trust myself to know what kind of safety I had. And again, I'm a privileged white woman that is highly educated. So I'm speaking from my experience. But this idea of understanding I don't have to show up authentically, quote unquote, everywhere I am if I do not feel safe, and nor should you. But I think it's our role, and I felt that it was my role with privilege to create spaces that people can do that. And that's what I would say is, if you show up with your values, especially if you do have this privilege, you are then creating a space for others to do the same. And I think that's our role as leaders.
And that's our role as allies, frankly.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I have a couple more things I want to ask you. Your business is called The Catch Group. And one of the chapters in the book is building your catch crew. And it's a very unique phrase. And I would love for you to fill us all in on the backstory behind that.
Yeah, sure. So the name of my company is The Catch Group, and the catch. So I love indoor rowing. So I've never rowed an actual real boat on the water with like a crew, but indoor rowing I've done for, this is like a rowing machine at a gym, or I have one at my house. And I love it so much. It's how I find balance, really. And I started working out on an indoor rower years ago. I found it in a group class, and I talk about it in the book. And there's a part of the stroke when you're rowing right before you push off. It's called the catch. Mm-hmm. And it's this idea of, when you're rowing, it's actually not really all about your arms. It's all about your legs. You push off every single stroke, and that's where you get your momentum, your drive. And so you push back, and every stroke you get a chance to do that again at the catch. And so this idea of consistency, of where can I find my power? Every stroke is not perfect or the same, but I get a chance to push back every time. And so that's where I love that idea. And so I named the company the Catch Group. And then within the Values First framework, this idea of having accountability and holding space for your values and doing this, I think you need people to help you, and you can do it for others, like we just talked about as an ally, but you need help from your friends, from the other people in your crew. And so this idea of a catch crew is to have a group of people that you are accountable to. Now, this doesn't have to be an intact group, but for me, it's almost like your board of directors, this idea of who do I go to for support? Who knows my values? Who can hold me accountable to it? Who can ask me about them? And who do I support as well? And so this idea of community and support is really, I think, another integral part of the success of living your values, especially as an entrepreneur. You're often on your own. If you are in the C-suite, there are not a lot of places where you can be vulnerable, right? And so you need a place, a relationship, a group of people who else is in your boat with you, and that is your catch crew.
I love that so much. I don't think I've told you this before, Laura, but I also loved the indoor rowing when it was offered at the gym that I used to go to in LA before we moved. I haven't been able to find another one. I may just have to plop down and get one at home. I've got a Peloton and love that. But the rowing experience and just really realizing it's not your arms, it's not your back, it is your legs. Wow. Changed everything. Because I would see these people like bent over and, just rowing like they're trying to saw a log with a big saw. And I'm like, of course you hate this class. Like, that's not the right way to do it. And I always had this fantasy about living near a body of water so I could join a women's crew team.
Yeah.
But that was never going to happen. And being in one of these classes and doing it, it's such a unique perspective. And I think it fits so beautifully with your philosophy and what you've created for other women leaders. Last question I have for you, because I could literally just continue this conversation all day, but we've set a boundary and respect each other's time, is your philosophy about authentic leadership is, I think, as I said, very timely. It's very inclusive. It absolutely resonates with what is being said about the millennials as a generation in particular. They don't want their parents' career path. They do not want to give till it hurts and have nothing left and then retire and die or get sick soon after. They're more than happy to work for other people as long as they can get behind the culture and the values of the company. So what do people need to know about authentic leadership if that's not where they are? Is that something that we can advocate for or we have to find?
Yeah, I think it's first finding it for yourself. I think if you're lucky enough, you've worked with a leader that you can say is authentic. And I think you're right. The workforce now, millennials and Gen Z, they're now learning how to do this every day. It's expected, right? They show up authentically. That's what they do. And so I think we owe it to future generations in the workforce to do it. But I think, like all things, it starts with self. So what does it mean for you? And for me, it is, authentic leadership is me leading with my values, just simply stated. So if I cannot articulate that, if I do not know what success means for me, then I am not able to then showcase that in my leadership, tell stories about it, motivate others around it. I'm not showing up fully because I may not be making the decisions based on that. And you're not modeling it, right? And so I think first and foremost, it starts with self. It absolutely can be found. All of us have it. I think it's this idea of, do I know what it is and can I articulate it? And then do people see it in my behavior reflected back, right? It has to model it because otherwise it is not authentic. It's just the words on the walls, right?
Yeah, and authentic is a bit of a buzzword in the coaching industry right now, as you well know, and that's not what we're talking about. And I think also authenticity is not something that can be manufactured. It is literally removing everything that stands in the way of it, because authenticity, I believe, is our natural state that we have been conditioned out of because of all the conformity messages and all the expectations of others. But in our natural state, I mean, young children are authentic. They don't have to learn. They don't have to learn it, and recognizing that your values matter and that this is what's going to change the world of work, whether you work for yourself or are building a company or work within a company, is not conforming to the norm, but transforming through authenticity. So I
completely agree. And I think it starts at the leader level. It would be great if it started at the organizational level, but where we're going to make big changes and where we're going to change cultures is leaders showing up, creating those cultures, and then modeling those behaviors to make it safe for other people to do the same.
Values first, just like the book says. So I will make sure that we link to the Catch Group, to the book Values First, to your socials, and all the other ways that people can connect with you. I'm so glad we got a chance to do this again. And thank you so much for all of your valuable wisdom and for just being a person who walks her talk.
Thank you so much. I've had such a great time and I cannot wait to connect again.
You've been listening to the Driven Woman podcast with Diane Wingert. Want more straight talk and strategy each week that will take you from spinning to winning? Don't forget to hit subscribe in your podcast player so you won't miss a single episode. Then head on over to the Driven Woman free and private Facebook group community. See you there.